Between 1862 and 1865, 14 children vanished from the Sacred Heart Orphanage in Pennsylvania. They were not adopted or transferred, they simply disappeared from all records as though they had never existed. Irish Catholic children with the distinctive scars of institutional life and thick accents were suddenly seen working on farms for local Protestant families. Their stories never aligned when these families were questioned. The horrifying truth is revealed in recently discovered letters between the Mother Superior and Philadelphia's bishop. These children weren't missing. They were sold. Before we proceed with the story of Sacred Heart Orphanage, understand this channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you're ready to uncover secrets that powerful institutions try to bury forever, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. I also want to know, comment below and tell me what state you're listening from. Are you brave enough to hear what truly happened to those 14 innocent souls? Let's discover the truth together. The truth behind Sacred Heart's missing children starts not with their disappearance, but with the desperate circumstances that first brought them to Pennsylvania's rolling hills. In 1862, Lancaster County was a patchwork of prosperity and prejudice. Fertile farmland produced abundant wheat and corn that fed Union soldiers in the Civil War, making Protestant German and English farmers wealthier than their ancestors ever dreamed. But prosperity brought problems. With so many young men off to war, farms desperately needed workers during crucial planting and harvest seasons. The labor shortage was becoming critical just as government contracts promised unprecedented profits to those who could meet demand. Into this landscape of opportunity and desperation came Sacred Heart Orphanage, established in 1859 by the Sisters of Mercy from Philadelphia. The three-story brick building sat on 40 donated acres just outside the small town of Strasburg. Its Gothic Revival architecture stood like a Catholic fortress amid the simple Protestant meeting houses and Lutheran churches dotting the countryside. The building's pointed arches and cross-topped bell tower made it impossible to ignore, which was exactly the point that troubled many local residents. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, a sharp-eyed woman of 45, had arrived from County Cork 20 years earlier with nothing but fierce determination and unshakable faith. She spoke with the lilting accent of her homeland, but her business sense was purely American. Under her leadership, Sacred Heart had grown from housing 12 children to nearly 60 by 1862. The orphanage took in Irish Catholic children from Philadelphia's overcrowded tenements, as well as the offspring of Irish immigrants who had died building the Pennsylvania Railroad through treacherous mountain passes to the west. The children ranged from 5 to 16, their faces bearing the distinctive pallor of institutional life and the hollow-eyed weariness of those who learned early that the world offered no guarantees. They wore identical gray wool uniforms, simple dresses for the girls, plain trousers and shirts for the boys, and attended daily mass in the orphanage's small chapel. The older children helped with cooking, cleaning, and maintaining the extensive vegetable gardens that fed the institution. Sister Agnes Flanagan, the orphanage's treasurer and Mother O'Malley's closest confidant, kept detailed records of every penny entering or leaving Sacred Heart's coffers. Her ledgers, written in a precise Irish hand, documented the constant struggle to keep the institution solvent. The Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia provided some funding, but wealthy Catholic donors were few in Pennsylvania, and the ongoing war had made charitable giving more difficult. By 1862, Sacred Heart was operating at a significant deficit, a fact that kept Mother O'Malley awake during long winter nights. The local Protestant community viewed the orphanage with suspicion bordering on hostility. The Know Nothing movement had stirred anti-Catholic sentiment throughout Pennsylvania in the 1850s, and the Civil War had done little to ease those tensions. Protestant ministers regularly preached about the dangers of papist influence, and local newspapers printed letters complaining about the orphanage's foreign children and their allegiance to Rome. Some farmers refused to do business with Sacred Heart entirely, while others charged inflated prices for grain and supplies. Into this atmosphere of religious tension and economic pressure arrived Father Michael Brennan in the spring of 1862. The diocese had sent him to serve as Sacred Heart's chaplain and to help Mother O'Malley navigate the increasingly difficult financial situation. Father Brennan was a different sort of priest, ambitious, charming, and possessed of a merchant's eye for opportunity. Unlike the elderly Irish priest who had served the orphanage previously, Brennan had been born in Philadelphia and understood the delicate balance between Catholic principle and American pragmatism. At 38, Father Brennan cut an impressive figure in his black cassock, his dark hair always perfectly combed and his shoes polished to a military shine. He spoke without an accent, having been educated at St. Charles Seminary in Philadelphia, and he possessed the rare ability to make both Catholics and Protestants feel comfortable in his presence. The local Protestant ministers found him surprisingly reasonable, and the wealthy German farmers discovered he understood their concerns about labor shortages and wartime production demands. What none realized was that Father Brennan's understanding ran deeper than sympathy. He saw opportunity where others saw only problems, and he began developing a solution that would benefit everyone involved, except perhaps the children of Sacred Heart Orphanage. The first sign of change came in late May 1862, when Mother O'Malley announced to the staff that several older children would be placed with local families to help with spring planting. This wasn't unusual in itself. Orphanages had long arranged for older children to work as farmhands or domestic servants. But Sister Agnes noticed the arrangements were being made personally by Father Brennan rather than through the diocese's usual placement procedures. When she asked to see the paperwork, Father Brennan assured her he was handling all documentation himself to avoid burdening the diocese's overworked administrators. The morning of June 15, 1862, dawned gray and humid, with thunderclouds building over the Susquehanna Valley. Timothy Walsh, a red-haired boy of 14 who had been at Sacred Heart for 3 years, was helping Sister Margaret tend the vegetable garden when Father Brennan approached with a well-dressed Protestant gentleman introduced as Mr. Ezra Hoffman, a prosperous wheat farmer from Lancaster Township. Timothy had been expecting this moment for weeks. Father Brennan had spoken to him privately about working for a good Protestant family who would treat him fairly and pay wages to help support the orphanage. The boy was eager to contribute. He had watched Mother O'Malley's worried expressions during meals and overheard hushed conversations about unpaid bills and dwindling supplies. If working for a Protestant farmer could help Sacred Heart survive, Timothy was willing to make the sacrifice. Mr. Hoffman examined Timothy with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to evaluating livestock. He checked the boy's hands for calluses, asked him to lift a bag of grain to test his strength, and questioned him about his experience with horses and farm equipment. Satisfied, Hoffman nodded to Father Brennan and counted out $45 in gold coins, an enormous sum representing more than most workers earned in 3 months. "The boy will work through harvest season," Hoffman said, his Pennsylvania Dutch accent thick with authority. "He'll live in the barn loft with my other hands, and I'll send him back in November when the work is done." Father Brennan blessed Timothy and assured him he was performing a great service for both his faith and his country. The Protestant farmer needed workers to produce grain for Union soldiers, and Timothy's labor would help feed the brave men fighting to preserve the Union. Sister Agnes watched from the kitchen window as Timothy climbed into Hoffman's wagon with his few possessions bundled in a cloth sack. Something about the transaction troubled her, though she couldn't articulate what. Perhaps it was the speed of the arrangement, or that Hoffman paid in gold rather than the paper currency most used during wartime. But Father Brennan seemed confident, and Mother O'Malley had approved it. So Sister Agnes pushed her concerns aside and returned to her ledgers. 3 days later, 16-year-old Margaret Connolly disappeared under similar circumstances. She was taken by Mrs. Sarah Zimmerman, wife of a prosperous German farmer, ostensibly to work as a household servant and help care for the Zimmermans' infant twins. Margaret was a bright girl with a gift for languages. She had learned Pennsylvania Dutch from German immigrants in Philadelphia and could read Latin well enough to assist at Mass. Mrs. Zimmerman paid $60 for Margaret's services, explaining she needed urgent help because her regular servant had run off to Philadelphia to work in a munitions factory. The pattern continued throughout the summer of 1862. Every 2 or 3 weeks, Father Brennan would arrive with another prospective employer, always Protestant, always wealthy, always in desperate need of immediate help. The amounts paid grew larger as harvest season approached and labor became scarcer. 13-year-old Patrick Murphy went to work for a merchant family in Lancaster for $50. 15-year-old Bridget O'Brien was placed with a banker's family in Columbia for $75. 12-year-old Sean McMahon, despite his age, was taken by a mill owner who claimed he needed a boy to help with his horses. By September 1862, 8 children had been placed with Protestant families, and Sacred Heart's financial situation had improved dramatically. The orphanage paid off its debts, purchased new winter clothing for the remaining children, and even added a small addition to accommodate more orphans from Philadelphia. Mother O'Malley praised Father Brennan's success, and the Sisters of Mercy relaxed their concerns about the institution's future. But Sister Agnes continued to feel uneasy. She noticed none of the placed children had written letters back, unusual, as children placed in previous years always maintained contact. More troubling, when she tried to visit Timothy at the Hoffman farm, she was turned away at the gate and told the boy was too busy with harvest work to receive visitors. The breaking point came on a cold October morning when Sister Agnes encountered Mrs. Hoffman at the Lancaster market. The woman was purchasing household supplies, and Sister Agnes approached to ask about Timothy's welfare. Mrs. Hoffman looked confused and claimed no knowledge of what Sister Agnes was talking about. She insisted her husband had never employed orphans from Sacred Heart and that their farm workers were all local men exempted from military service due to essential agricultural work. When Sister Agnes pressed the issue, Mrs. Hoffman became agitated and suggested the sister was mistaken about which farm Timothy had been sent to. But Sister Agnes was certain. She had watched Timothy leave in Ezra Hoffman's wagon, and she had Father Brennan's word the boy was working there. The contradiction made no sense unless someone was lying. That evening, Sister Agnes confronted Father Brennan in his small office behind the chapel. She demanded the truth about Timothy and the others and insisted on seeing the written agreements documenting their placements. Father Brennan was initially dismissive, suggesting Sister Agnes was confused and had misunderstood Mrs. Hoffman's comments. But when the sister threatened to write directly to the bishop in Philadelphia, Father Brennan's demeanor changed entirely. His friendly smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare that seemed to look through her. "Sister Agnes," he said quietly, "you must understand these are complicated times. The war has created opportunities that good Catholics must seize for the greater good of our faith and our institution. Those children are safe and well cared for, and their sacrifice ensures Sacred Heart can continue to serve God's purposes." "What sacrifice?" Sister Agnes demanded. "What have you done with those children?" Father Brennan leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, considering his words carefully. "I have found them homes where they can contribute to the war effort while learning valuable skills from Protestant families who appreciate their labor. In return, these families have made generous donations to Sacred Heart that have secured our future. It's an arrangement that benefits everyone involved." "But Mrs. Hoffman said," Sister Agnes began. Mrs. Hoffman said what she needed to say to protect her family's privacy. Father Brennan interrupted. "The families who have taken our children value discretion, and we must respect that. Some arrangements are best kept confidential, especially during wartime." Sister Agnes felt a chill unrelated to the October weather. "Father, are you telling me you have sold those children?" The word hung in the air between them like a curse. Father Brennan's eyes narrowed, and his voice carried an unmistakable threat. "I'm telling you, sister, that you have a choice. You can continue to serve God faithfully at Sacred Heart, focusing on your duties and trusting the wisdom of your superiors. Or you can pursue questions that will bring nothing but trouble to this institution and everyone in it. The bishop sent me here to solve Sacred Heart's problems, and I have done exactly that. I suggest you remember where your loyalties lie." The winter of 1862 to 1863 passed in an atmosphere of uneasy silence at Sacred Heart Orphanage. Sister Agnes continued her duties as treasurer, but the joy had gone out of her work. She studied the ledgers with new eyes, noticing patterns that had previously escaped her. The donations that had appeared so providentially during the summer all came from the same source, a vague entry labeled "placement services" that corresponded exactly with the dates children had been taken. She began to understand she had witnessed not charitable placement, but something far more sinister. The children hadn't been adopted or indentured traditionally. They had been sold to Protestant families who needed workers but didn't want to pay full wages to adult laborers. The transactions were disguised as charitable arrangements, but the substantial payments made it clear Sacred Heart was running a human trafficking operation under the cover of religious charity. The realization tormented Sister Agnes through long winter nights. She had taken vows of obedience to her religious superiors, but also vows to protect the innocent children in her care. The 8 children who had disappeared the previous summer had been her responsibility, and she had failed them utterly. Their trust had been betrayed not by strangers or enemies, but by the very institution that promised them safety and care. Mother O'Malley seemed genuinely unaware of the true nature of Father Brennan's arrangements. She spoke proudly of the orphanage's improved finances and praised the priest's success in finding good homes for older children. When Sister Agnes raised concerns about the lack of correspondence, Mother O'Malley dismissed her worries, explaining Protestant families often discouraged workers from maintaining ties to Catholic institutions. "Those children are beginning new lives," Mother O'Malley said firmly. "We must trust God has guided them where they need to be, and focus on caring for the children who remain with us." But Father Brennan was already planning to expand his operation. As spring approached, he began conducting evaluations of the orphanage's children, assessing their physical condition, work skills, and temperament. He paid particular attention to recent arrivals from Philadelphia, newcomers with few friends at the orphanage, whose disappearance would cause less disruption. The priest had also cultivated relationships with a broader network of Protestant families throughout Lancaster and neighboring counties. The success of his initial placements created demand for more workers, and the approaching planting season promised even higher prices for healthy, trainable children. Father Brennan spoke of expanding operations to include children from other Catholic institutions in Pennsylvania, creating what he called a regional placement service that would benefit multiple orphanages while meeting the labor needs of Protestant farming communities. Sister Agnes realized she was witnessing the birth of a systematic trade in human beings, exploiting both the desperation of Catholic institutions and the prejudices of Protestant employers. Catholic orphanages needed money to survive, Protestant families needed workers obtainable more cheaply than adult laborers. Father Brennan had found a way to profit from both needs while maintaining a veneer of religious respectability. The psychological impact on the remaining children was subtle but unmistakable. They noticed the older children who left for placements never returned or wrote letters, unlike children placed in previous years. Whispered conversations in the dormitories revealed growing anxiety about their own futures. The children began to see reaching their teenage years not as a milestone toward independence, but as a sign they might be next to disappear. 10-year-old Mary Catherine Donovan, who had been close to Margaret Connolly, began having nightmares about being taken by strangers. She would wake screaming, crying for Margaret and begging the sisters not to let Protestant men take her away. When Sister Agnes tried to comfort her, Mary Catherine clung desperately and whispered, "They're not coming back, are they? Margaret and Timothy and the others, they're never coming back." The question haunted Sister Agnes because she increasingly suspected Mary Catherine was right. The children taken weren't being trained for independence or given opportunities for better lives. They were being consumed by a system that valued their labor more than their humanity. Once they entered that system, they effectively ceased to exist as individuals with rights and futures. As snow melted and spring appeared in the orphanage gardens, Sister Agnes made a decision that would ultimately expose the full horror of Father Brennan's operation. She began keeping a secret record of every child placed, documenting names, ages, physical descriptions, and the families who had supposedly taken them. She also discreetly questioned recent arrivals from Philadelphia about siblings or friends at other Catholic institutions in the region. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. Sacred Heart's missing children were part of a much larger network of exploitation stretching across Pennsylvania and possibly beyond. In March 1863, as the Civil War entered its bloodiest phase, Father Brennan received an unexpected visitor who would unravel his carefully constructed network. Bishop Francis Kendrick of Philadelphia arrived unannounced at Sacred Heart, ostensibly for a routine inspection of the diocese's rural institutions. But Sister Agnes quickly realized the bishop's visit was anything but routine. Bishop Kendrick was a stern, intellectual man who had risen through the church hierarchy, combining theological scholarship with administrative precision. He had received troubling reports from other Catholic institutions across Pennsylvania, reports of children disappearing without proper documentation and suspicious financial windfalls coinciding with these disappearances. The pattern had become too obvious to ignore, and the bishop had come to Sacred Heart to investigate personally. Father Brennan received the bishop with elaborate courtesy, conducting a tour of the orphanage's improved facilities and praising the Sisters of Mercy for their dedication. He presented financial records with pride, explaining how his innovative placement program had transformed Sacred Heart from a struggling institution into a model of efficiency and sustainability. The bishop listened without comment, his pale eyes taking in every detail. But when Bishop Kendrick asked to see documentation for children placed with local families, Father Brennan's confident demeanor cracked. He explained records were stored securely in Lancaster and couldn't be retrieved immediately. He promised to have them available in a few days, but the bishop insisted on seeing them before departure the next morning. That evening, as Father Brennan worked frantically to create required documentation, Sister Agnes made a decision requiring tremendous courage. She approached Bishop Kendrick privately and requested a confidential meeting. The bishop, who had served in Pennsylvania long enough to recognize signs of institutional corruption, agreed to hear her. In the orphanage's small library with only a single oil lamp, Sister Agnes revealed everything she had discovered about Father Brennan's operation. She presented her secret records of missing children and described her encounter with Mrs. Hoffman at the Lancaster market. She explained her growing suspicions about the true nature of the placement services and her fears for the children taken from Sacred Heart. Bishop Kendrick listened in grim silence as Sister Agnes detailed a systematic slave trade operating under Catholic charity. When she finished, the bishop sat quietly for several minutes, weighing implications. Finally, he spoke with absolute authority. Sister Agnes, what you've told me represents one of the gravest scandals in our diocese's history. If your suspicions are correct, Father Brennan has violated sacred vows and committed crimes against church and civil law. I want you to understand pursuing this will likely close Sacred Heart and damage the church's reputation in Pennsylvania. Are you prepared for those consequences? Sister Agnes met the bishop's gaze without flinching. Your Excellency, I took vows to serve God and protect the innocent. Those 14 children trusted us to keep them safe, and we failed them. If Sacred Heart must close to prevent this happening to other children, that is God's will. The bishop nodded slowly. Very well. Tomorrow morning I confront Father Brennan with your allegations. Be present as a witness and bring every document compiled. We'll get to the truth regardless of cost. But Father Brennan had developed a keen sense of self-preservation. He noticed the private meeting between Sister Agnes and Bishop Kendrick and correctly interpreted the sister's refusal to meet his eyes during evening prayers. That night, as the orphanage slept, Father Brennan gathered his most important documents and what money he could carry, disappearing into the Pennsylvania countryside. By morning, Father Brennan was gone, along with nearly $300 from Sacred Heart's treasury and all records of his placement operations. He left only a brief note claiming he'd been called to serve as a military chaplain and would depart immediately for the front lines. The note mentioned neither missing children nor families who had supposedly taken them. Bishop Kendrick was furious at the priest's escape, but relieved to have confirmation Sister Agnes' allegations were true. Father Brennan's flight was as good as a confession, freeing the bishop to take immediate action uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. He dispatched investigators to locate missing children and began determining which other institutions might be involved. What they discovered over following weeks was a network of corruption exploiting dozens of children across multiple counties. Father Brennan had worked with at least 3 other priests and established relationships with Protestant families throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. The operation generated thousands in illegal profits while condemning vulnerable children to unpaid labor and social isolation. But the investigation also revealed something more disturbing. Several placed children couldn't be located. Some families had moved to other states, taking children with them and leaving no forwarding addresses. Others claimed children had run away or died from illness but provided no documentation. The trail of at least 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, had gone completely cold. This transformed Bishop Kendrick's investigation from an internal church matter into a criminal case involving state and federal authorities. The bishop realized some missing children might have been transported across state lines, making their disappearance a federal crime under laws governing interstate commerce and kidnapping. In April 1863, as the investigation expanded, Sister Agnes received an unexpected visitor providing the first real breakthrough in locating missing children. Jacob Stoltzfus, a young Mennonite farmer from Lancaster County, arrived at Sacred Heart in obvious distress. He had heard rumors about the investigation and came forward with information helping locate some missing children. Stoltzfus explained his family had been approached by Father Brennan the previous summer about taking a Catholic orphan for farm work. The Mennonites, as a peace church, maintained neutrality during the Civil War but experienced severe labor shortages as young men left Pennsylvania to avoid the draft. Stoltzfus's father had been tempted but declined because the arrangement conflicted with Mennonite principles about fair treatment. However, Stoltzfus knew other Mennonite families who had accepted children from Father Brennan and had growing concerns about their treatment. The Mennonite community was tight-knit and largely self-governing, but rumors circulated about families working orphan children like slaves and preventing outside contact. "There's a family in our district," Stoltzfus told Sister Agnes and Bishop Kendrick. "The Yoders took 2 children from your priest last summer. A boy and girl, Irish with red hair. The boy about 14, the girl maybe 12. They work dawn to dusk in Yoder fields and live in a shed behind the barn. My wife has seen them at the creek fetching water. She says they look afraid of their own shadows." Bishop Kendrick immediately dispatched 2 investigators to locate the Yoder farm and verify claims. What they found confirmed worst fears about missing children's fate. The Yoder family had purchased 2 Irish children from Father Brennan, Sean McMahon and his younger sister Ellen, taken from Sacred Heart the same day despite Ellen being only 11. The children lived in conditions barely human, sleeping on straw in an unheated shed, working 16-hour days without pay, forbidden to speak to anyone outside the Yoder family. They'd been told Sacred Heart was destroyed in a fire and all sisters died, leaving them no one to turn to. The Yoders threatened to turn them over to Union Army recruiters if they ran away, claiming Irish Catholic children were enemy sympathizers who'd be imprisoned or shot. The discovery provided first concrete evidence placed children were held in slavery. But it raised terrifying questions about other missing children. If the Yoders treated children brutally, what happened to children sold to families with fewer scruples or community oversight? The investigation took new urgency when Bishop Kendrick received a letter from the Catholic Diocese of Baltimore reporting similar disappearances from orphanages in Maryland. The letter described a network of priests and officials selling children to Protestant families throughout the Mid-Atlantic, some transported as far south as Virginia and North Carolina. The operation appeared larger than initially suspected. Father Brennan was just one participant in a regional conspiracy. As federal marshals joined, they uncovered evidence of a sophisticated criminal network operating at least 2 years. Conspirators developed a system for identifying vulnerable children, creating false documentation, and moving them across state lines to families willing to pay premium prices for completely controllable workers. The network generated tens of thousands in profits while condemning hundreds to forced labor. But the most disturbing discovery came when investigators located a Chester County farm where 3 former Sacred Heart children were found dead under suspicious circumstances. The farmer claimed they died from fever during the harsh winter of 1862 to 1863. But the local coroner's examination revealed severe malnutrition and physical abuse. The children were buried in unmarked graves behind the barn, their deaths unreported to any authorities. The farmer, prosperous grain merchant Samuel Crawford, initially denied knowledge of how they died. Confronted with coroner's evidence and threatened with murder charges, he broke down and confessed. He admitted purchasing 3 children from Father Brennan for $200, intending to use them as unpaid farm workers until adulthood. But the children were weak from institutional upbringing and struggled adapting to harsh farm conditions. Crawford claimed he tried caring for them when ill but was unwilling to summon a doctor, fearing questions about their presence. By the time he realized their serious condition, it was too late. Rather than report deaths and face difficult questions, Crawford buried them secretly and destroyed all evidence. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation and transformed public perception. What initially seemed minor corruption became systematic child abuse and murder. Pennsylvania newspapers called for immediate arrests, and political pressure mounted for comprehensive federal investigation. Just when we thought we'd seen the full horror, the investigation took a darker turn. If this story chills you, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit like to support our content, subscribe to never miss stories like this, and let's discover what happened when federal authorities tracked down Father Brennan and uncovered his network's true scope. Federal marshals located Father Michael Brennan in October 1863 at a Union Army camp near Gettysburg, serving as a chaplain under an assumed name. The priest had grown a beard and claimed to be Father Patrick Murphy from Boston, but his Pennsylvania accent and Latin knowledge betrayed him. Confronted with evidence, Brennan initially maintained innocence, claiming he provided valuable service to church and Protestant families needing workers. But evidence was overwhelming. Federal investigators documented at least 47 children sold through his network across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Financial records showed Brennan and collaborators generated over $15,000 in profits, an enormous sum representing more than most Americans earned in a decade. Under intense interrogation, Father Brennan confessed to his operation's full scope. He revealed the network was his creation, born from observing Protestant families willing to pay substantial sums for completely controllable workers. He convinced other priests to participate by arguing profits would help struggling institutions survive wartime economic pressures. These children had no future anyway, Brennan told interrogators with stunning callousness. They would have spent lives in poverty, dying young from disease or accidents. This way they served useful purpose and contributed to Catholic institutions helping other children. His confession revealed locations of some missing children, leading to rescue of 11 more former Sacred Heart orphans found working on farms across 3 states. But 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, remained unaccounted for. Some were sold to families who moved west, taking children to territories with limited federal jurisdiction. Others were sold to families claiming children died or ran away without credible evidence. The investigation also uncovered evidence some children were sold for purposes beyond labor exploitation. Federal investigators found evidence at least 3 children were sold to buyers specifically seeking young servants for what documents euphemistically described as personal service. Reports, sealed by court order and classified over a century, suggested some missing children were sold into sexual slavery. The full horror became clear when investigators realized Brennan operated a catalog system for child trafficking. He maintained detailed records of available children, ages, physical descriptions, work skills, temperaments. Prospective buyers could review and select specific children meeting particular needs, with prices varying based on age, health, and capabilities. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, confronted with evidence, suffered a complete nervous collapse. She genuinely believed Father Brennan placed children in good homes. The revelation she was an unwitting accomplice destroyed her mentally and spiritually. She was removed and spent her life in a convent infirmary, never speaking coherently about her time at Sacred Heart. Sister Agnes, despite exposing the conspiracy, was consumed by guilt over failing to act sooner. She suspected something wrong from the beginning, but obedience to religious authority prevented decisive action until too late to save most children. She left Sacred Heart after the investigation concluded and spent her life working with freed slaves in the South, seeking redemption through service to other trafficking victims. Father Brennan's trial became one of the Civil War era's most sensational criminal cases. Federal prosecutors charged them under new laws against interstate human trafficking, arguing crimes comparable to the slave trade the Union fought to abolish. Defense portrayed defendants as misguided religious officials trying to help children find better lives. But evidence of systematic exploitation and abuse was overwhelming. During trial, testimony from rescued children revealed trauma endured. Sean McMahon testified he worked 18-hour days during harvest and was beaten with a leather strap showing exhaustion. Ellen McMahon described sleeping in an unheated shed in winter, sometimes waking to ice on her blanket. Others testified about being forbidden native language, denied medical care when ill, and threatened with violence contacting former caretakers. Most impactful testimony came from 12-year-old Bridget O'Sullivan, sold to a Baltimore County family. Bridget described working as a domestic servant dawn to midnight, sleeping on the kitchen floor, eating only scraps. When she ran away, she was captured and locked in a root cellar 3 days without food or water. The family told neighbors she was a slow-witted distant relative requiring constant supervision, preventing questions. Father Brennan showed no remorse. Addressing the court before sentencing, he delivered a lengthy speech justifying actions as necessary for Catholic institutions' survival during wartime. He argued Protestant families provided opportunities for useful work and Christian instruction children wouldn't have received in orphanages. He claimed his only regret was not helping more children find productive lives outside the system. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Father Brennan was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Collaborators received 5 to 15 years. The judge described crimes as a betrayal of everything civilized society holds sacred, expressing particular outrage at exploiting religious authority for the most heinous form of slavery. Sacred Heart Orphanage never recovered. The Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia closed it in 1864, transferring remaining children to other orphanages. The building sold to a Protestant denomination and converted into a seminary, but that failed within years. Local residents reported the building seemed cursed. Strange accidents befell anyone operating a school or institution there. For decades, investigators searched for the 6 never-found children. Timothy Walsh was reportedly seen working an Ohio farm in 1867, but the family moved before authorities arrived. Margaret Connolly was allegedly spotted as a servant in a wealthy Virginia household but disappeared before contact. The other 4, Patrick Murphy, Bridget O'Brien, and 2 younger children names obscured in Brennan's records, vanished into post-Civil War anonymity. They may have been moved repeatedly, identities changed, histories erased. They may have died from overwork, abuse, or neglect, deaths unreported, graves unmarked. Or they survived to adulthood, forever carrying childhood exploitation trauma, unable to return to stolen lives. Psychological impact on rescued children was profound and lasting. Many struggled with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, anxiety attacks, difficulty trusting authority. Several ran from new institutions, preferring streets to risking betrayal again. The scandal affected Catholic-Protestant relations in Pennsylvania and nationally. Protestant communities suspicious of Catholic institutions now had concrete evidence of corruption and foreign influence. Catholic leaders struggled rebuilding trust with congregations and public. The case became an anti-Catholic rallying point persisting into the 20th century. Federal authorities used it to justify expanded oversight of religious institutions and stricter enforcement of laws governing children in institutional care. New regulations required detailed placement documentation and regular inspections of families taking orphanage children. These reforms prevented similar large-scale trafficking but came too late for Sacred Heart's 14. Investigators continued haunted by missing children's fates. Federal Marshal James Crawford spent years following rumors and alleged sightings but never found conclusive evidence. His 1870 final report, "The trail of these innocents has grown cold, and I fear their ultimate fate may never be known. They were consumed by a system valuing labor more than humanity, paying the ultimate price for our failure to protect them." Sister Agnes' secret records, instrumental exposing conspiracy, were preserved by the Diocese of Philadelphia and deposited in Pennsylvania State Archives. Later researchers noted meticulous care recording each child's name, age, and characteristics. Her notes revealed a woman genuinely loving children in her care, tormented by inability to save them. Most haunting entry, beside Timothy Walsh's name, red hair, freckles, scar on left hand from kitchen accident. Dreams of being a schoolteacher, afraid of thunderstorms. Last seen June 15, 1862. God forgive us all. Similar personal details created portraits of individuals reduced to commodities in Brennan's network. The Sacred Heart building stood empty nearly a decade. Residents reported lights in windows at night and children's voices from empty rooms. Whether supernatural manifestations or products of guilty consciences, they reminded of tragedy within those walls. In 1874, the building was demolished by new owners claiming structural unsoundness. But area residents knew the real reason: it had become a shame monument no one could bear to look at. Bricks were used to build a Lancaster courthouse, still a foundation for justice administration. The land became a public cemetery. A 1925 granite marker commemorates exploited and lost children, in memory of the innocent children who suffered here. May they find in death the peace denied them in life. Even this modest memorial was controversial. Some argued it reminded of tragedy better forgotten. Father Brennan served 18 years before dying in federal prison in 1881. Death certificate listed pneumonia, but prison records suggest declining health from melancholia, possibly belated recognition of his crime's enormity. He was buried in an unmarked prison grave, name omitted from memorials. Other priests involved received varying punishments but all faced defrocking. Attempts to locate families who purchased children mostly failed. Many moved west where federal authority was limited. Children sold to these families disappeared into America's expanding frontier, fates forever unknown. The scandal contributed to significant reforms in religious institution operations. New laws required regular government inspections of orphanages and strict placement documentation. These reforms prevented similar trafficking but caused increased suspicion and regulation of previously autonomous religious charities. Perhaps the most lasting legacy was recognizing institutional authority, religious or secular, couldn't be blindly trusted with vulnerable children's welfare. The case showed even respected religious figures could commit monstrous crimes when personal ambition combined with institutional power and social prejudice. The 14 children disappearing between 1862 and 1865 were victims of a perfect storm: wartime desperation, religious prejudice, economic opportunity, and moral corruption. Individual stories were lost in American expansion and conflict narratives, but their collective tragedy reminds of the price innocents pay when society fails to protect its most vulnerable. This mystery shows even trusted institutions can harbor darkest secrets, and the most innocent can fall victim to exploitation for profit. What do you think? Was everything revealed, or are secrets still buried in Pennsylvania's hills? Comment below. Share thoughts on whether some children survived, living unknown under different names. If you enjoyed this dark American history chapter and want more stories of secrets hidden in our nation's past, subscribe, hit notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries questioning everything about history. Truth is always more complex and terrible than we imagine, with countless other stories waiting to be told. See you next video, uncovering another mystery powerful people hoped would stay.